Welcoming in our weekly visitor every Tuesday, it's ESPN NFL analyst Dan Orlovsky, whose appearances on One Bills Live are presented by Caesars Sportsbook, an official mobile sports betting partner of the Buffalo Bills. All right, Dan, we're pretty much at the turn here. Bills are 6-2. Convincing win over the Seahawks this past Sunday. Granted, the Seahawks helped them a little bit with some miscues of their own. Not that the Bills didn't have their own share of pre-snap penalties and the like, which are going to undoubtedly be cleaned up as best as possible this week. But maybe just give us your overarching thoughts about some of the things they did offensively in particular, Dan, like breaking some tendencies, some first down under center play action, which is a popular topic of ours. So maybe just kind of break that down for us in terms of what you saw from them.
Yeah, I loved how aggressive they came out in the football game. I think a lot of the things that, ironically, we've talked about together, you saw. Once again, you saw the 6 offensive linemen when they could run the football or on early downs get into their play action game. I think you saw the bunch motion game when it came to their run game and trying to make sure that they were trying to displace some defenders in their run game. I think you saw some of the perimeter screen game be an advancement of their run game, just trying to get the ball out in space with some of the motions. I think you saw Kincaid at either the 1 or the 3 flexed out, which creates a lot of space for him to win. I also think it allows the receivers to get vertically downfield. I think you saw, some of the tackle trap game that they used some motion with as well. So that was a lot of really good use of taking the plays that they run well and just constantly presenting them in different pictures. And I think the philosophy of trying to be aggressive throwing the football paid dividends for them.
And you talk about the way they threw the football. Keon Coleman, we've talked about how he's getting a little better. This last game against Seattle, I mean, what's that? How does that change the Bills' offense if he turns into the dude he looked like he was this last Sunday?
Yeah, so I think what it does, Steve, is it presents a lot of questions to defenses. Like if you're a defense and you want to play zone coverage, no matter where other people are, you've got to be able to handle their ability to run the football, and then you've got to handle their space when it comes to a Kincaid or a Cook or a Shakir. If you want to play man coverage, you have to take your number 1 and number 2 corners and say, can we match up with our 1 and 2 corner on those 2 guys? Is someone physical enough to handle Keon? Does someone have the kind of at the point of contact strength to handle Keon? And I think that's more the question if you're a defensive group of it's not necessarily can you handle them or at the line of scrimmage with his releases or can you run with them? It's like, do we have someone big and strong enough to handle some of those contested catches? You saw that one in the red zone. You saw the seam ball when the corner overlaps. So that's the question that they're going to constantly present defenses with. And then forget, kind of a Shakir or a Kincaid when it comes to some of their matchups as well. So I just think if he continues to show the impact that he's having, he's going to, really force defenses into some situations when it comes to that man coverage.
And then I don't know how much credit we give to Joe Brady, but I think he deserves some here because it just feels as though Josh is playing within the structure of the offense more often this season than we've seen in recent seasons. We know that he's always been apt to leave the pocket early, play off script, and, make second reaction plays. It just feels like through these first 8 games, he's done that less. Not saying he's never going to do it. I think it's always going to be a part of his game, but just the advantage of playing within structure a little bit more, it just seems like this offense is it's capable of staying on schedule a little bit more because the answers are there within the scheme, right?
Yeah. So Chris, look at it in this regards. Okay. Number 1, they threw 4 perimeter screens. So you are taking the thinking, the desire, the adrenaline away from the quarterback for those 4 snaps, but yet building a positive play that is beneficial for him. Like, let's be candid. A perimeter screen goes for quarterback stats. So, a lot of guys love that. Sweet. So there's 4 right there. Then you have 3 different keepers. Okay. So, like, keepers for quarterbacks are fun because it's simplified. You're more than likely going to get a completion. Sometimes there's a play there to put it downfield. More often than not, it's a dump down. And you got 2 designed quarterback runs. So there's 10 plays right there of very simple execution, very light thinking. And you're almost, I don't want to say handcuffing the quarterback, but you're guiding the quarterback in what to do with the football. Okay. Just there's 10 right there. And then if you think about 2 or 3 of the underneath stuff that they build in for a Shakir, where it's like just catch and throw it. Now you're watching the seam to Keon. That was a great, but like the underneath, just catch and throw it to Keon. We just want to get the ball dumped out to his hands. You're talking about 15 plays that are built in, that are, we call it and run. It's breather plays. Okay. Like that's easy, simple stuff. And then that leads you to some of those seam throws, the one to Keon, the play fake on the deep crosser, the seam to Kincaid. So I think that, again, it's not like they're taking stuff away from Josh. I think they're just, when they allow him to be a difference maker, there's less moments for it. But I think there's a clearer picture of how to go do it. And I think that is a credit to Joe for sure.
We always talk about, Josh and how he's playing, and like we just been talking about how he's staying in structure, playing a little bit differently this year. He threw the 1 interception. I was saying it's kind of a good thing he threw the pick, because now it's not a thing anymore. You can just go ahead, it starts to become,
sure.
You know what I mean? It starts to become a thing. You start thinking about that rather than what you're doing in the moment at hand. In this game, though, Josh was 24 of 34, and they also had 34 run attempts. So it was 34 runs, 34 passes. How does that affect, and how much easier does that make it on Josh and all these receivers when, Cook is running for 5.8 per carry?
Yeah, it's a massive thing when, I think Joe's comment when we sat with him on Monday Night Football was, he believes the identity of the offense is to be able to do what they want when they want. And I think for a quarterback to be able to just hand the football off, and again, like it's not like they're doing, this isn't the Lions where they're doing 3 or 5 or 6 different kinds of runs. They're majoring in 3 runs. They're majoring in their 6 offensive lineman run. They're majoring weak zone, or they'll major in their tackle pull. They're just kind of constantly doing it differently. But to be able to constantly control the game and willingly hand the football off, and know handing the football off is 1, good for the team, and 2, good for me, because there's only so many different ways that teams can handle the run. You either have to blitz it or you have to put bodies down to it. And I think that's a very good thing for Josh. The interception, Steve, for me, not a big deal. I will say this. There's 2 fumbles in this game, if I'm right, where I sit there and go, don't start that, where it's, getting a little bit froggy in the pocket, a little bit, I don't want to say overly aggressive in the pocket, but, maybe being so almost heat check, NBA Jam heat check. Don't lose sight of how great of a job you've done of valuing the football this year. And, that's something that grabbed my attention, is making sure that they can hold on to that mindset, Josh specifically, of like, you've done such an amazing job of that. Don't lose sight of it.
And how much, if he can maintain that, does that help his case for MVP consideration, assuming, the team is still in contention and all of that stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Josh has really been in the MVP top 2 or top 3 really since the start of the season. I know we had those 2 weeks straight, and saying MVP second week of the season doesn't merit much, but now that we're, almost halfway through the season, I think the only 2 people that you can make a legitimate case of like really putting ahead of him are Lamar and Derrick Henry. Now you can make the argument that Lamar benefits from having a back that's being so dominant, and Derrick benefits from having a quarterback playing so dominant. I think both of those guys at some point will steal from the other, essentially, attention and whatnot. Jaden Daniels certainly up in that conversation, but Josh, there's no question, is that top 2, top 3 spot in the MVP race. I would fully expect him to to remain there and consistently be there. And if they continue to win, it's going to be hard to not give it to him.
So the Bills come in 6-2. And And all of a sudden, we had a topic of the day was, at the midseason, what's your midseason opinion of the Buffalo Bills and why? And I said, the Bills are kind of where I thought they'd be. They seem to be getting better. They've overcome some obstacles, some injuries and stuff. They're playing well. They've actually won games where they weren't playing their best and look good doing it at times. But I think the thing that it surprised me, Dan, is that the AFC East as a division is a dumpster fire outside of Buffalo.
Yeah, I
now,
agree.
Miami seems to have extinguished the fire and seems to be getting it back together. Tua's going to be good. I mean, he's going to get back in there, and they'll be able to climb out of it, get back and at least get into the wild card race here in the next few weeks. You know what I mean? Get back to 500 and keep going. How does Tua coming back, I mean, what do the Dolphins have under the hood? Can they close that gap? I don't say win the division, but close the gap on the other teams that are vying for that wild card spot. I know it's early.
Yeah, I think it's hard for Miami. And I've said that all off season. The challenge for the Dolphins this year was going to be they had to get healthy in the beginning part of the year because they weren't fully healthy with Jalen Phillips, and he started, and then he's not there, and then Bradley Chubb. So were they going to get healthy? Some of their offensive line pieces out. So you're sitting there going, you got to get healthy. The back half of their schedule is brutal. It is brutal. And so that, sitting at 2-5, if you were a Dolphins fan, you'd hope that they would be 5-2 because they know the back end of the schedule is a really daunting challenge. So as much as I love Tua, I mean, look at their schedule from November on. They're playing, that's a playoff contender. That's a playoff contender. You got a playoff contender with the Packers, playoff contender with Houston. I mean, their final stretch of games is a beast, man. And to try to dig yourself out of a hole, I think, is a little bit of an unrealistic expectation for them.
Their defense on paper, Dan, it looks good. I mean, top 10 total defense, pretty good, in some other areas as well, including third down. I don't know. To me, it doesn't pass the smell test. And I think Arizona exposed some things that are deficient. I mean, I know they only have 9 sacks. That's 31st in the league. And obviously without Jalen Phillips and Chubb, you would expect that. You only got a young Chop Robinson up there that's got any kind of explosion and suddenness to his game. So that's not helping the guys on the back end. And they've got some guys that just, quite frankly, look old and slow on the back end. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. was turning Jalen Ramsey around like a spinning top, and they didn't have an answer for McBride either last week. What's going on there?
Yeah, so Miami's a little bit of the injuries, they were this team this time last year that had 3 edge rushers that were absolute just game changers. None of them are there right now because of injury, and so that's been an issue. I think Jalen playing a little bit on early downs inside has been beneficial for them. Holland being knocked out, Javon Holland's a star safety. Him being out for an extended period of time is a massive loss. So they were trying to figure out who was really going to be playing corner opposite Jalen, how healthy could like a Kendall Fuller be? And so you're sitting there trying to build a defense with Anthony Weaver, who's their defensive coordinator, and you're trying to find healthy pieces that could play in certain places. Their pass rush doesn't have a guy right now. I think there's good players, but they don't have a guy that they can find a way because, really the scheme is built to either play coverage to help your rush, not be a blitz team, or simulated pressures. Neither of them have gone well for them this year. And because of some of those pieces that have been lost, the Phillips and the Holland, it's a team that is probably not as talent-wise as dominant as it was 2 years ago and/or last year. So they're trying to figure out a little bit of what can be their go-to stuff or go-to person. And really outside of Jalen being a playmaker, that's been lacking for them.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, too, how their offense has had to change with Tua out. They've been trying to do it with these backup quarterbacks. Give us an idea of, where it's headed now offensively. Because with, you got Tyreek, you got Jalen, and those guys seem to be like engines that can never get, turned over.
Yeah, the offense this past week with Tua looked very much so with the offense that we've become accustomed to. With the backup quarterbacks, it wasn't a shell of itself. I think you saw a lot of the remnants of what this offense has always been, though, with Mike and Tua. Number one, ball is going to come out on time over the middle of the field. It is an anticipation and rhythm offense. Number two, the perimeter screen game is massive. I think they threw 6 or 7 of them last week that created big plays. They don't throw Buffalo, like I mentioned, they're throwing perimeter screen to maybe get 5 or 6 yards. Like, Miami's throwing perimeter screen to kind of go get chunks. The one-on-one opportunities to Tyreek, candidly, the reason they lose this game is they had 2 or 3 drops late in the football game that were inside the 5 or 10 yard line. Waddle has one down to the 1 that just they didn't convert on, and then he misses Tyreek on an end zone fade that is just off, and so they were close to scoring 35 plus to 40 points. So it's still an offense that's very explosive. Buffalo knows they play it usually relatively well. But don't think that Tua is just coming back. It's going to take time for them to get used to each other again. Like they were humming this weekend.
Yeah, and just to take that a step further, if you go back to the first meeting, Dan, like the Bills had that perimeter screen game completely sniffed out, and yet McDaniel continued to go to it time and time and time again. And I thought it got less and less and less effective as the game wore on because the Bills tackled well in space, rallied to the football, and limited yards after the catch. They've always been good at that. What could possibly be McDaniel's plan this time around?
Yeah, so I think the challenge is when they play Buffalo, because Buffalo has 11 people on defense that play the pass and the run relatively similarly. You know what I mean by that? Like, they got corners, oftentimes in the run game, they say, well, we got to set the edge. Well, they've got the secondary that sets the edge as well. So I think when it comes to that stuff, you sit there and go, well, they handle that perimeter screen and or long handoff stuff well. And another foundational part of their offense is like work the middle of the field. The challenge is Buffalo also does a very good job of their, pack the paint players. Their nickel, their Mike, and their Sam linebacker, whatever we want to call them, the Taryn, the Williams, and it'll be Bernard or whatnot. They do a really good job of not being impacted by auxiliary things. They trust that the ball is going to be sent back inside to them if it does get to the perimeter. So they play inside out in the run. And then in the pass game, they kind of play inside out to the pass as well. And so their kind of responsibility, it feels like, is often pass first in the middle and then run first outside. And I think they structurally match up well.
So I'll put it to you. Our question of the day is, mid-season report on the Bills. What's your opinion of them? What's the top end? What's the low end? What do you think? What do you think of this squad that here in Buffalo and how they've done 6-2, 8 games, halfway in?
Steve, I said yesterday on Get Up, there's 1.5, like 2 teams that I trust in the AFC. Kansas City, I absolutely trust, and then Buffalo, I trust. Now, there's a little bit of how good, is the defense because some of the pieces, like, how healthy can Bernard and Taryn stay? But I trust those 2 teams top to bottom. Baltimore is a very good football team. I don't trust their defense when it matters the most. Houston, don't trust their offensive line. So I think that they're right there with Kansas City. I would give Kansas City the advantage still, in my opinion, as a team. Their defense is a dominant defense, and I think their offense will settle in. Hop was a good addition, but I'm surprised, candidly. I thought Buffalo would be good this year. I didn't think that I would have them, in my mind at least, as the, at worst, second best team or second most trusted team in that conference.
Dan, appreciate the time. As always, we'll catch up with you next week.
Thanks, guys.